Welcome to The Debate. Here on Cognitive Dose, our core mission is, curing blind spots and shattering cognitive bias. And today we are turning our analytical lens toward what might be the most celebrated business success story of the 20th century.
Yeah, a story of pure grit, scrappy underdogs, and literally a waffle iron.
Exactly. We are conducting a deep investigation into Phil Knight's universally acclaimed entrepreneurial memoir, Shoe Dog. And just to be clear up front, I will be taking the position that the text genuinely captures the tangible innovation and sheer willpower required to build a global empire.
And I'll be arguing, based on the findings from our research dossier, that this narrative actually relies heavily on lethal survivorship bias, systemic labor exploitation, and historical revisionism.
It's going to be a fascinating discussion. I mean, Shoe Dog is truly a phenomenon. It's a ubiquitous pedagogical text, it is beloved by venture capitalists, it's assigned in business schools all over the world, and it is widely celebrated for its emotional resonance.
Oh, absolutely. It's an incredibly powerful read.
Right. At its core, it really champions this just keep going ethos. It's this incredibly romantic narrative of relentless perseverance in the face of just impossible odds.
It really is.
So to truly understand the debate today, we need to build the foundation of Knight's original narrative first. We have to start where the mythology itself begins, with what he famously calls the crazy idea. The surface narrative paints a picture of a young Phil Knight in 1962 out on a morning fog run in Oregon, having an epiphany to import Japanese running shoes.
Just to undercut the massive German duopoly of Adidas and Puma, right?
Dogs selling shoes out of the trunks of their cars at local track meets. You've got the legendary track coach Bill Bowerman literally pouring liquid rubber into his wife's waffle iron to invent the waffle sole.
Which is a brilliant visual.
It is. And the entire time, the company is operating on the absolute brink of insolvency. I mean, they are battling these conservative, risk-averse bankers just to keep the lights on for one more week. It is a compelling story of grit and tangible innovation.
Well, that sounds great in theory, but let's look at the systemic reality. While that surface narrative is beautifully written, our deep investigation today is bringing in the research dossier, which takes a highly critical multidisciplinary approach to the source material.
Okay, let's hear it.
The primary thesis of this dossier is that corporate memoirs are intrinsically vulnerable to profound narrative sanitization. They function simultaneously as ostensibly objective historical records and as, frankly, massive corporate public relations instruments.
I see why you think that, but I have to push back a bit. You can't just wave away a multi-billion-dollar global empire as a stroke of luck or good PR. The book champions a just keep going ethos because Knight actually did that.
He did, but I come at it from a different way. We have to deconstruct that just keep going methodology using behavioral economics. Think of the frameworks provided by thinkers like Kahneman, K-A-N-I-M-A-N, and Taleb, T-A-L-E-B. The dossier points out that the book's core pedagogical value is mathematically invalidated by survivorship bias.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener really quickly. Survivorship bias is the logical error of focusing only on the people or companies that made it past a rigorous selection process, while entirely ignoring the ones that failed.
Exactly. Knight extrapolates his specific managerial decisions, aggressive debt leveraging, maintaining zero cash reserves, constantly pushing the brink of ruin, as the primary drivers of his success. But this logic completely ignores the vast, invisible graveyard of thousands of mid-20th century athletic apparel enterprises.
Enterprises that utilized identical, reckless financial leverage and just collapsed.
Right. So treating Knight's probabilistically anomalous decisions as a replicable blueprint isn't just unscientific, it is empirically dangerous for future entrepreneurs. It's essentially like taking financial advice from a lottery winner who firmly believes his secret to wealth was wearing a lucky blue shirt when he bought the ticket.
That is a compelling analogy, but I'm not entirely convinced by that line of reasoning when we look at the specific, tangible innovations happening on the ground.
How so?
Well, the lucky blue shirt didn't change the lottery numbers, but Bill Bowerman explicitly tailored shoes for heavier American athletes. He replaced standard leather with lighter nylon. He created full-length midsole cushioning. There is a tangible, superior product being engineered here that directly translated to athletic performance. That isn't just survivorship bias, that's causality.
I hear you, but I just don't buy that the product alone explains the scale of the empire. While the product evolution is real, the narrative heavily relies on the clustering illusion and false causality.
The clustering illusion?
Yeah, it's a cognitive bias where the human brain desperately seeks patterns and intentional rules in completely random data distributions. The text imposes a teleological structure on what were essentially random macroeconomic events.
Wait, let me clarify that term for the audience. By teleological structure, you mean writing the story backward, starting at the finish line, a successful global empire, and then looking backward to pretend every random accident along the way was actually destiny.
That is exactly right. The text misattributes the company's success almost entirely to the individual genius of a small Oregon-based team, while completely erasing massive macro-environmental tectonic shifts.
You mean the wider economic context of the era, like the 1970s running boom?
Yes, precisely. Knight didn't engineer the massive post-war American economic boom. He didn't engineer the specific cultural rise of jogging and personal fitness. He didn't control the highly favorable foreign exchange rates with recovering Asian economies.
And he didn't cause the internal stagnation that crippled the massive German duopoly of Adidas and Puma at exactly the right time.
Right. Attributing the capitalization of these massive external shifts solely to individual ingenuity is a severe manifestation of the forecast illusion. The risk was improperly priced, and the narrative uses the halo effect to retroactively validate behaviors that, in the vast majority of business context, are catastrophic.
Okay, but if grit and waffle irons weren't mathematically enough to save them from bankruptcy, how do they actually survive? Because if the narrative smooths over statistical luck and massive macroeconomic variables, it really begs the question of what else is being smoothed over.
Oh, there is plenty more. Let's look at the company's genesis and its explosive split with its original Japanese partner, Onitsuka Tiger. In the memoir, Knight frames this foundational relationship as a heroic struggle against snail mail-era logistics. He positions himself and his American distributors as vulnerable victims of circumstance. Yes. He claims he was forced by an increasingly hostile Japanese conglomerate to innovate and break away just to survive.
Right, but how does the dossier view that?
This is where the research dossier's findings on historical revisionism are truly jarring. The transition from distributing Onitsuka Tiger products to manufacturing an independent line of footwear was not a defensive maneuver.
What was it then?
Documented historical evidence reveals it was a calculated, premeditated act of clandestine corporate espionage and intellectual property subversion.
Hold on. I have to defend the reality of the era here. This was the 1970s. Global business is inherently cutthroat. Knight had a massive supply chain problem and an unreliable partner who was actively looking to replace him with other American distributors.
That's true, but
Isn't finding independent subcontractors just aggressive sourcing? You have a fiduciary duty to keep your own company alive.
it crosses the line from aggressive sourcing to intellectual property theft when you actively cultivate a corporate spy deep within the administrative ranks of your partner's corporation.
Wait, a corporate spy?
Yes, Knight did this while still operating under a legally binding exclusive distribution contract with Onitsuka. This internal operative provided Knight with highly confidential proprietary intelligence, specifically the names, locations, production capacities, and technical specifications of Onitsuka specialized subcontractors.
So he utilized their stolen supply chain architecture as a direct blueprint to bypass the parent company.
Exactly. He secretly negotiated directly with these manufacturers to produce his own proprietary line of footwear before his exclusive distribution contract had even expired.
But how does Knight possibly justify that severe breach of contractual ethics to his own staff at the time? Or even to the reader now? He doesn't just come out in the text and say, hey, I stole my partner's supply chain blueprints.
No, he certainly doesn't. He relies on what the dossier diagnoses as xenophobic fabrication to create a psychological and moral shield for his own unethical business practices. Knight replaced the reality of his intellectual property theft with a fabricated, racist myth.
A myth about what?
He claimed to his staff that the Japanese corporate ecosystem was so deeply invested in subversion that they operated explicit industrial spy schools, analogous to commercial schools for typists in the United States.
Oh, wow. So it's a preemptive strike mechanism? It's like cheating on your business partner and justifying it by convincing yourself and your team that they were probably going to cheat on you anyway, so you just beat them to the punch.
That's a great way to put it. He sanitized his own preemptive espionage by projecting those exact behaviors onto his foreign partners. Furthermore, internal memoranda from 1968 reveal a heavy reliance on cultural stereotyping, explicitly referring to the illogical Japanese mind as an operational threat.
Which fundamentally shatters the myth of the innocent underdog.
Completely. By reframing predatory corporate espionage and breach of contract as underdog ingenuity, the text actively normalizes deeply unethical business practices for future generations of entrepreneurs.
Well, if we look closely at the underlying assumption of that early supply chain, the entire business model from the very start was predicated on regulatory arbitrage. The foundation relied on locating production in jurisdictions where the cost of labor was artificially depressed by authoritarian governments or a sheer lack of legal protections.
Absolutely.
But again, I will play devil's advocate here. You're applying 2020 supply chain ethics to 1970s and 80s global logistics. They were a scrappy startup. They didn't own the brick-and-mortar factories in Indonesia, Vietnam, or China. They were just buying shoes. How can you hold a massive target on their back for the actions of independent factory owners halfway across the world?
That's a common defense. But have you considered that this aggressive margin-seeking wasn't an accidental byproduct of rapid growth? It was the foundational mechanism of the corporation's early profitability. The memoir systematically whitewashes the systemic labor exploitation.
By treating it as a glitch rather than a feature?
Exactly. It reframes the reliance on horrific poverty wage conditions as mere operational exceptions or logistical hurdles to be solved, rather than acknowledging that the business model actively required those conditions to thrive.
Which leads directly to the 1990 sweatshop crisis. That is arguably the most glaring ethical vulnerability in the corporate narrative. When activists started exposing what was actually happening in those factories, it became an international scandal. How does the dossier frame their reaction to a crisis of that magnitude?
The dossier uses Zadig's 5 stages of organizational learning regarding corporate social responsibility. Initially, the corporation was entirely in the defensive stage. Knight adopted a posture of absolute denial, categorically rejecting allegations of complicity.
Using the exact legal shield I just mentioned, right? Arguing that because they didn't directly own the factories, they were absolved of responsibility.
Precisely. The memoir rationalizes this by claiming his initial anger was just a toxic reaction, while continuing to minimize the systemic nature of the supply chain.
But eventually, facing international media pressure, consumer boycotts, and university protests, they had to move into the compliance stage. And they did. They commissioned former UN Ambassador Andrew Young to conduct an independent evaluation of their overseas operations.
Yes, in the resulting report largely exonerated the corporation. However, independent labor advocates and academic sociologists eviscerated it as a masterclass in performative auditing and corporate propaganda. Critics describe the report as a deliberate attempt to polish what was clearly a rotten apple.
Performative auditing. So instead of actually evaluating the working conditions, it's like hiring a celebrity substitute teacher to walk through the nicest pre-cleaned hallways of a failing school, and then publicly declaring the entire district a success based on that one curated walkthrough.
That is exactly how the methodology functioned. It relied on guided, curated tours of factory floors rather than independent, anonymous worker interviews, where employees could speak without fear of retaliation. And the corporation immediately weaponized this sanitized document in full-page newspaper advertisements to deflect public outrage.
I have to challenge that historical framing with the present reality, though. You cannot deny the stark contrast between those historical labor practices and the highly visible progressive public relations strategy the brand employs today.
Well, I don't know about that.
Hear me out. Today, The brand is globally recognized for highly progressive social justice campaigns. They prominently feature athletes who protest systemic inequality. Doesn't using their massive platform to elevate marginalized voices have intrinsic ethical value? They are practically synonymous with modern social activism in sports.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that as a genuine ethical evolution. The research dossier diagnoses this exact discrepancy as woke washing.
Let's define that for the audience. Woke washing refers to a sophisticated evolution in corporate marketing, where a massive multinational corporation co-opts progressive social justice messaging while simultaneously maintaining internal structures and global supply chains that exploit vulnerable populations.
Exactly. By engaging in high-profile, polarizing social justice campaigns in the West, the brand successfully diverts public and activist attention away from its ongoing ethical lapses and lack of operational transparency in the Global South.
So you're saying it is the commodification of dissent. They are transforming legitimate political outrage into lucrative brand equity.
Yes. It allows the corporation to align itself with the moral arc of progressive youth culture without requiring any fundamental structural alteration to the capitalist mechanisms that necessitate their overseas exploitation. The brand effectively sells the aesthetic of revolution while functioning as an apex predator of globalization.
That is a harsh but frankly very compelling read on the situation.
And the text of Shoe Dog operates as a primary artifact of this neoliberal mythology. It reinforces what critical sociologists call the CEO society.
That's a fascinating concept. The CEO society being a cultural paradigm where the corporate takeover of everyday life is celebrated. The narrative structure systematically equates a massive, complex, multinational corporate entity with the individual willpower and personality of its white male founder.
It personalizes an inherently amoral economic machine. It allows consumers to form parasocial emotional bonds with the brand based on the perceived virtues of its creator. But more insidiously, it deliberately obscures the systemic macroeconomic forces that actually enable the corporation's hypergrowth.
The book suffers from acute weird sample bias.
WEIRD being the acronym for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic.
Yes. The narrative evaluates success strictly through Western ideals of market dominance and IPO valuations, while remaining entirely culturally blind to the non-weird populations. It completely erases the predominantly female international workforce whose suppressed wages literally capitalize the company's expansion.
They absorbed the immense physical and environmental costs, yet they are omitted from the wealth creation narrative. Completely, and in their place, the text installs the great white male savior myth, which paves the way for the modern era of hypocritical performative activism.
When we evaluate this narrative through such a rigorous, multidisciplinary lens, the synthesis is incredibly sobering. Shoe Dog transitions from an inspirational blueprint of entrepreneurial perseverance into a highly curated instrument of corporate hagiography and epistemic distortion. The text mathematically fails as a pedagogical tool due to lethal survivorship bias. It substitutes factual history with xenophobic fabrications to sanitize corporate espionage, and it represents a masterclass in moral compartmentalization regarding international labor.
The final observation we must draw from this dossier concerns the inherent danger of that great white male savior myth in our business literature. When we romanticize the corporate takeover of everyday life, when we elevate the ruthless pursuit of capital accumulation to a heroic, quasi-spiritual endeavor, we actively obscure the marginalized global workforce that actually built that wealth.
Right.
Buying into this sanitized mythology leaves us culturally blind and ethically vulnerable. It allows toxic corporate practices to hide behind the sophisticated facade of social justice rhetoric, monetizing dissent while ignoring the enduring realities of capitalist exploitation.
And that is exactly why we must approach texts like this, no matter how emotionally resonant they are, with profound skepticism. The goal of this discussion is to advise you to use this rigorous analytical approach to evaluate all the media and corporate narratives you consume. This is how we build our mental immunity against epistemic distortion. There is always a deeper systemic reality waiting to be uncovered beneath the surface of a compelling story.
Thank you for joining us on this deep investigation, and remember to cure your blind spots by subscribing to Cognitive Dose.